In an increasingly interconnected world, the challenges we face are more complex and interdependent than ever before. From climate change and cyber threats to geopolitical tensions and economic instability, understanding and mitigating global risks is crucial for our collective future. Every year, the World Economic Forum brings together leaders from business, government, academia, and civil society to address these pressing issues. A key highlight of their efforts is the annual Global Risks Report, which is a comprehensive analysis that identifies and assesses the most significant risks confronting our world today. Based on extensive surveys and expert insights, the Global Risk Report provides a critical overview of the potential threats that could shape our world in the coming years. In this video, we'll delve into the latest edition of the World Economic Forum's Risk Report. We'll explore the key findings, understand the emerging trends, and discuss what they mean for policymakers, businesses, and individuals alike. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Geography Girl. Let's dive in. The World Economic Forum's Risk Report is an annual publication that identifies and analyses the most significant global risks that could impact societies, economies, and the environment over the coming years. Created in collaboration with Marsh McLennan and the Zurich Insurance Group, its purpose is to provide policymakers, business leaders, and the public with a comprehensive understanding of these risks, their interconnected nature, and potential implications. The report is crucial as it provides a strategic overview of the most pressing global risks, enabling policymakers, business leaders, and the public to better understand and prepare for potential challenges. By highlighting key threats such as climate change, economic instability, technological disruptions, and geopolitical tensions, the report aims to foster informed decision-making, encourage proactive risk management, and promote resilience and sustainability in the face of an increasingly complex and uncertain global landscape. The risk report is primarily informed by the Global Risk Perception Survey, which has brought together leading insights from 1,500 experts across academic, business, government, the international community, and civil society. It is supported by an executive opinion survey of 11,000 business leaders in 113 economies, which identifies potential hotspots and regional manifestations of global risks. A global risk is defined as the possibility of an occurrence of an event or condition which would negatively impact a significant proportion of the global GDP, population, or natural resource. The Global Risk Perception Survey invites respondents to assess the likely impact of global risks over a 1, 2, and 10-year period, the range of potential impacts of a risk rating and potential for compounding crisis, on which actions have the most potential risk for reduction, and how each risk will evolve in the landscape. The report is structured around how risks will materialise and how they should be managed over time with regards to climate change, changes to population size, growth and structure, developments in technology, and shifts in geopolitical dynamics. You can see here how the top 10 risks over the next 2 years have been categorised and ranked across economic, environmental, societal, and technological themes. And technology seems like a good place to start. With 2024 being the year where 49% of the global population across 64 countries have elections, the top risk for the next 2 years is the spread of misinformation and disinformation, including India, Mexico, Indonesia, the US, the UK, France, and South Africa. The top risk for the next 2 years is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. This could disrupt the electoral process dramatically, contribute to increasing distrust of information, as well as the media and government, polarising views, which could trigger civil unrest and confrontation. And with governments seeking to crack down on said false information, there is a risk of repression and erosion of rights. Technological advancements have enhanced the volume, reach, and efficacy of false information, becoming more difficult to track and control. Social media companies are likely to be too overwhelmed with the sheer number of campaigns happening this year. Disinformation is also usually targeted to specific groups, such as minority communities, as well as through opaque messaging systems like WhatsApp. The perception of this as a risk varies throughout the world, ranking number 1 in India, which has a population of 1.4 billion and a 50% internet penetration, and is a 6th risk in the US, with a quarter of that population but almost double the internet penetration. And it's not seemingly a priority in the Russian election. This topic intersects with issues such as social polarization, the spread of infectious diseases, and censorship and surveillance. To quote the report, AI has enabled an explosion of falsified information and synthetic content. The ways in which this could manipulate individuals, damage economies, and fracture societies could be through the pursuit of climate activism, stock market manipulation, and conflict escalation. Governments are rolling out regulations to target online disinformation and illegal content. For example, China has mandated that AI-generated content must have a watermark. However, it is unlikely that the speed and the effectiveness of regulation will match the pace of technological development. The next is geopolitical risks. And the risk in conflict is a new entrant in the top 10 risks of this year, which saw the biggest increase in ranking, up from 9 points from the last year. There are obvious hotspots which are posing high-stake ramifications for the geopolitical order, global economy, and safety and security. As geographical, ideological, and environmental trends converge, these could cause a resurgence of hostilities and increased state fragility. As the world becomes more multipolar, a widening array of powers could step in to fill the vacuum, potentially eroding the guardrails for conflict and containment. Escalation in the three high-stakes hotspots could disrupt global supply chains, financial markets, security, and political instability. All three of the areas are at a geopolitical crossroads, with vested interests in oil and trade routes in the Middle East, a balance of power in Eastern Europe, and technical supply chains in East Asia. Whilst nuclear is a potential, it's thought by the report that it's not the likely route, but there is the potential of contagion of conflict. There are frozen conflicts that are at risk of thawing, including in the Balkans, Libya, Kashmir, the Kurdish region, and the Korean Peninsula. There is a risk of resource stress, economic hardship, and weakened state capacity, and the rise of non-state actors. Resource at-risk countries could become caught in a proxy warfare between neighbouring economies, paramilitary groups, and crime networks. This risk is inextricably interconnected with other important issues, such as involuntary migration, social polarization, and misinformation. Interesting, there is a side note about the global fentanyl epidemic. The enforcement of the Taliban's ban on poppy production in Afghanistan would have implications on the global drug trade. Historically accounting for 80% of opium production, this shortfall could be supplemented by synthetic drugs such as fentanyl. These are so much cheaper and easier to produce for crime groups, but could have severe health implications and is the leading cause of death among young Americans. Bearing the brunt of a changing climate, the after effects of the pandemic, colonialism, and the cost of food and fuel is fueling an anti-Western sentiment in the global south. At the same time, military power is projected by the West in parts of Africa, for example, and has the potential to create power vacuums. Economic downturn. These geopolitical uncertainties have a profound impact on the global economic system, with persistent inflation and interest rates, which is slowing the growth of indebted and smaller countries. Google searches for recession spiked at the announcement of the COVID pandemic and with the invasion of Ukraine, and we're just not sure how many more economic shocks the economy can take before we hit a tipping point. Economic downturn was in the top 5 risks for 102 countries, whereby in 2022, most of these countries were more concerned with economic stagnation. With us entering such unprecedented times, it makes it very difficult for banks, governments, and companies to predict economic risk exposure, and we suffer from supply chain pressures due to these geopolitical conflicts. The debt situation is out of control. The US is running a $1.7 trillion deficit from 2023 alone, which is double from the previous year. However, the world's largest companies will not have their debt mature for another 10 years, which will hopefully insulate them from the highest interest rates of today. If there are no further economic shocks, a global transition towards the green economy could help to stimulate economic extreme weather. This brings us nicely to the potential for environmental impacts. This report takes a long look at 2034. Take a look at this risk matrix for the next 2 to 10 year period. Extreme weather has been identified as the most severe, with biodiversity loss and economic collapse worsening the most, rising from 20th to 3rd place by 2034. Current trajectories for global warming meant that at least one climate tipping point could be passed within the next 10 years. Nearly all IPCC scenarios predict we will breach the 1.5 thresholds in the early 2030s, with high confidence in the dying off of the low-life coral reef, the collapse of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets, and thawing of permafrost. Boreal forests, mangroves, and seagrass meadows will soon become vulnerable in this scenario. Not all tipping points can be observed, however. Indeed, we may have already surpassed some. Some will be obvious, such as the ocean heatwave that precipitates the collapse of coral reefs. The edges of these tipping points can be sharp, such as the point where the Greenland ice sheet reflects less heat than it absorbs. I want to end on a high because that's all just pretty bleak. The paper mainly focuses on the issues around responses rather than prescribing recommendations, which are pretty light. One is taking a significant leap towards nuclear fusion, providing green, clean energy, and expediting our transition towards net zero. There's also the strategic use of technologies such as AI and quantum computing to address environmental concerns and improve risk modelling. These are global challenges which are inherently connected, but these risks are not necessarily linear in how they evolved and interrelate with each other. Wow, that was a lot. We've been around the block, but we have barely scratched the surface. From environmental crisis and economic stability to technological and geopolitical threats, understanding these risks is the first step towards building a more resilient and sustainable future. Together, we have the power to shape the world better for generations to come. Please comment below your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.